A neighbor can be a friend and an ally, but can also be somebody with malice intentions. We never truly know who we move next to until it's too late. So, without further hesitation, let's begin. Take it back to 2007. I was 16 when this began, 18 or 19 when it finally went to court. Picture a Norman Rockwell-esque suburban family. Parents, 3 kids, a yard and a dog. In a blink of an eye, you'll miss it. USA. One random day, a neighbor man has a mild dispute with his neighbor. As a totally warranted response, neighbor man takes every hose he has and floods their yard. Solid decisions lead to solid consequences, so naturally, he was fined for water waste. My parents run the water in small town USA, and because this neighbor lived a block from us, he decided to drive over to the water district shouting that he was an acquaintance of my parents. Second solid decision of many to come from this neighbor. Absolutely nobody takes kindly to name droppers, so tuck that gem away under life facts. My parent comes in and tells him that even if his kids did this, they would have the same repercussions, gracefully glossing over the fact that, other than maybe driving by one another, none of us actually ever had an interaction with this neighbor. He repeats the name of the man working on the front desk, as well as my parents' names, and claims it's now personal, and storms out. My family members and I began to see him at random places constantly. The DMV, the grocery store, and our respective jobs. Apparently, when you're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and your parents pay for your house, you have all kinds of time to stalk. It went from random sightings while we were out and about to phone calls. The cliche 90s type of call. Breathing, hang-ups, and I can see you variety. At this point, Neighbor Man was more of an annoyance than scary. But as I have stated, when you underestimate crazy, you lose every time. He began parking across from our house, staying from 6 p.m. to 4 a.m., literally just sitting in his car, blasting music, staring at our house. Fool must have had the determination and bladder of a racehorse, because who sits there for 10-ish hours? His music was trash too. Maybe he was a masochist and into self-harm, seeing how long he could suffer through shitty music and a full bladder. I doubt anyone with a semi-rational concept of social interaction could fathom why. This went on from 3 to 4 times a week to a nightly occurrence. Imagine being a 16-year-old female that doesn't even feel comfortable to change in her own room because of the prospect he might see her through the blinds somehow. Trying to sleep knowing he's out there, we were prisoners in our own home. He began to get bolder. He drove his car speeding up onto the sidewalk at my sibling and her partner while they were on the sidewalk coming from a date. They both had to physically jump out of the way to avoid being hit. He made lewd gestures at me when I brought the dog for a walk and was waiting for my sibling to come out to join us. It was so bad, I ended up crying and going inside. This had been going on for about a year at this point. The cops always said the same thing. There is nothing we can do unless there's a threat or someone is harmed. My parents confronted him in the street after my incident, to which Neighbor Man called the cops and they came asking us why we were harassing him. I will never understand why the system waits until you are a victim, rather than prevent someone from being victimized. Almost 2 years in, and it's Christmas time, one of my parents had a brain aneurysm. Fortunately, they made it through without any lingering effects, which is extremely rare. I convinced my other parent, who had been living at the hospital with their sick partner, to come home, shower, and eat. About 9 p.m., we get a knock at the door. A random man in ratty clothes holding a Christmas present said he's there to deliver it. We ask him who sent him, and he says he can't say. We ask who he works for, and he shoves the gift to my parent and leaves. We are obviously uncomfortable opening it. My parent decides they need to know what's in it and opens the present. Inside was a 17-page document of the grounds on why my neighbor is suing my parent that was currently in the hospital. Even I could tell it was fake, with the grammatical errors and typos. Neighbor Man took the time to sit and type this up himself, thinking it would scare us. The document and fake details he put in did not. The fact this 40-something-year-old man was so fixated on our family that he sat and typed a 17-page fake document did scare us. Things progress. and my neighbor began pacing in front of his car and pretending to have phone calls where he talked about pushing my parent down the stairs, or knowing where we kids went to school and worked, and how easy it would be to access us at any time. At the time, I worked closing shift that let me off at about 1 a.m. He would be parked next to my car and followed me home. One time I even tried to take random roads, and he still stayed right behind me. Pulling up to the house with neighbor man right across the street and having to get out and run to the door was a nightmare. We were all exhausted from not only the aneurysm scare, but also living looking over our shoulders. My parents' friend told her friend, who was a district attorney, about the situation. She called and came over and took our case on pro bono. Testifying was a wild ride. We had to put in official statements prior to being called to the stand. We were also not allowed to be in the room when a family member was testifying. Nor were we allowed to talk in the halls as we waited for our turn. Imagine reliving 2 years plus of traumatic experiences, being cross-examined where you are made out to be the liar, and then not able to have your family comfort or support you afterwards was not ideal. There was enough to put him away for a year and a half, as well grant a felony restraining order. We moved while he was still incarcerated. To make the context easier, I'm a lesbian. I thought this was a pretty well-known fact, but I guess no one had thought to tell my old neighbors. Actually, they just presumed my girlfriend was my roommate, until they caught us kissing through the kitchen window. I remember that day, and how it was pretty normal. My neighbors seemed friendly, a little too perfect, but still friendly. The mother and I had both had a garden, and we spent some time talking about how our plants were going. She always had a weird laugh, kinda like a donkey trying to be feminine, but I ignored it. The laugh wasn't the weirdest part. It wasn't even 5 minutes after the kiss. Her husband was at our door. He was a bigger man, beefy, with a balding head and dark hair, and thick eyebrows that seemed to move on their own accord. My girlfriend once said that he looked like a Harry Potter character. I definitely agreed. He started off shouting at us. It was rather bizarre since his shouting got so loud, I had seen the across the street neighbor peek her head out to see what was wrong. It was mainly the generic stuff. God's will, you're going to hell, how dare you talk to my children. Side note, their sons were 18 and 21. I thought that was kind of strange. My girlfriend, always the negotiator, managed to talk him down and back to his home. We went to bed silent that night, like speaking would remind us of what happened. I said, we ought to move. The neighbors hate us. She said, it didn't matter. There would always be rude neighbors. I wish we would have moved. The series of events between that day and 5 months later, where we finally found refuge in my brother's house, was god-awful. It started with my garden getting ripped out. My flower stems snapped and the roots showing. My carrots, which I was so proud of, upturned and smashed beneath a boot. Someone had taken a shovel and dug up clumps of dirt just to make sure nothing else could grow. I'm not ashamed of it. I cried. When my girlfriend left for work, an hour later, the D slur was carved over and over into the paint of our car. It covered nearly every inch of the left side door, and a few scattered across the right. Our headlights were smashed, and they even let air out of our tires. So, she had to call in sick. One night, at nearly 4 a.m, the oldest son stood at our door and rang the doorbell for 15 minutes straight. He only stopped when my girlfriend opened the upstairs window and said she would call the police. He also urinated on our porch furniture. Every morning, I would take our dog out for a mile-long walk. He's a golden retriever, so he needed the exercise. It didn't take long for the youngest to follow after us, shouting obscenities and saying that he would penetrate the gay right out of me. It got so bad that my neighbor on the other side, a 20-something gym nut, had to start walking with me. One of them taped a note to our door saying that they would burn the house down, burn us for our sins. The police said that there was no evidence for who it was. We stopped going to the police. Their sons filled up water balloons with urine and threw it at my house. Our dog had an outside bowl of water, and we found that that too had been urinated in. Another time, it was rat poison, though that seemed too big of an accusation. So, We told ourselves we were wrong. I was continuously calling my family members during this time. My parents thought the idea was crazy. It had to be some misunderstanding. Why, that sounds like it came straight from a movie. It couldn't be that bad. It was the rat poison that did it for us. Even though we told ourselves it was fake, the anxiety of one of us dying had gotten to be too much. I called my brother in tears, and he was there to help us pack by the next day. He also chewed the neighbors from hell out, which was the perfect way for it to end. Believe it or not, I have always been the type of person who attracted deranged people. I'm quite young, but I don't count the number of creeps I have met anymore. This one, however, I will always remember it for several reasons. Firstly, because he was my neighbor, and secondly, because it could have ended up very badly. I first met him when I moved into my actual apartment. It's a nice house divided into 5 apartments. Mine was on the first floor, his was on the ground floor, and I had to walk in front of his window to get to the front door. At first, I didn't mind him. He looked kind of creepy, but for me, everyone looks creepy. Well, he did get angry at my big brother for only walking in front of his window, but he was never aggressive to me. Plus, I spent most of my time studying, and was back at my place pretty late. Life was going peacefully. I finished my studies and got my diploma. And I found myself a great partner. I would have had everything to be happy if it wasn't for my health. It was declining, nothing life-threatening, but I had to stay at my place instead of working. My life was pretty boring and uneventful, until one day, I was tidying up and my interphone rang. Instead of answering it, I just looked through my open window and saw the neighbor staring at me. He was standing in front of the door, still and kind of threatening. I asked him if he needed anything, waited for an answer, but after a really long silence, he just entered the building. I heard his door closing. It was weird, but I had better things to do, so I just went back to sweeping my floor. A week later, all of his shutters were closed. There was an inscription on all of them that said, "Sealed." It didn't look official, more like crooked handwriting and messy black marker. Once again, I brushed it off, as I was kind of glad this creepy neighbor was gone. I figured he got arrested or something. Once again, life was peaceful, and 2 months after his disappearance, a nice dude started living next door. A great guy, always smiling and ready to help. He had his head shaved like the last neighbor, and was kind of chubby, but friendly. Everything was good for a year, but then things went down. And oh boy, ugly it was. I usually said hello to the nice neighbor. He would politely ask me about my day, and my partners, and everything else. But that day, he didn't say hello, like he usually does. Instead, he was sitting in his chair, staring at me with dark eyes and following every move. I still waved at him, smiling. I figured he was having a bad day. Since then, he would pass daytime sitting in the dark looking through the window, and at night blasting metal while he laughed and screamed like a maniac. At this point, neither me or any of my neighbors could sleep. We kept calling the police, but they didn't seem to care about the noise. I don't know when I exactly figured out the nice neighbor was the creepy neighbor, but when I did, it left me with a sour taste in my mouth for some reason. Probably because I knew for sure he had a history of violence and fights gone bad. Then one day, I was at a friend's house for a week since my partner was working. He was keeping up the apartment. I was shopping with my friend when I received a message that made me shiver. The neighbor let himself into our apartment. My partner didn't realize he left the door unlocked, and the neighbor just climbed the stairs, opened the door, and entered. I can't say exactly what happened since I wasn't there, but apparently he wanted to shave my partner's hair and eyebrows. He was delirious, having a hard time talking, and just saying gibberish. My partner managed to get him out and close the door. He was merely amused by the whole thing. When I got back, things were getting worse. First, he would stop me and my partner in the street, completely gone, telling us how the only reliable source of information was our toaster. Then he started to corner me. He would wait for me to almost reach the door, and would violently open his. Then he would tell me how I shouldn't go out, and how I shouldn't trust anyone but him. It was clear as day how bad his mental health was, as his speech was more and more slurry, and he would take long pauses while staring to the side. During 2 weeks, he managed to corner me 4 times. Not much, right? It was only 4 times that I was going out in those damn 2 weeks. This period was awful. I could not leave my apartment alone. I could not live my life like I wanted to. I just stayed locked in my place, waiting for my partner. Even with precaution, I kept meeting him, and the more I saw him, the more uneasy I grew. For weeks it felt like I was a hostage at my own apartment. I should have called the police. As our encounters were more and more regular, he grew agitated. He would fidget, he would look over, and kept getting closer. There was a point I could feel his moist breath on my skin. I didn't know what to do. I was terrified to call the police because all of our other neighbors were on vacation. I was afraid he would try to hurt me if I called the cops. Until this day, I met my boyfriend at a bar near our place. My first mistake was to leave after my partner. I quietly climbed down the stairs, did not make any noise. When I opened the door and tried to sneak away from his window, he saw me. He opened the window, and for the first time since what seemed like forever, he told me in clear speech,
"Don't go outside. Stay at home. If you need anything, come to me, or go out Monday at 7 a.m.
I frightfully agreed and smiled at him, my hands gripping on my purse. I looked at him closing his window, and I waited for him to turn his back and started walking away. When he saw me, he screamed.
Did I tell you you could leave?
I saw him reaching for his door. I felt my blood running cold. I was nothing compared to him. I had no strength. I was just a sick woman against a massive man. So I just ran. I ran for 2 minutes to the bar, passing bystanders who I'm sure were staring at me. I ran for my life and kept running like that until I saw my partner and our friends at a table. And then, just then, I cried. I collapsed on the chair and cried for 3 minutes straight. Later, we all went back home, our friends hiding me. My second mistake that day was convincing the others they could go out to the theater just 3 houses away from the apartment, that I would be fine since I wouldn't go out. So, they left. It was really hot, so I opened the windows before turning on the fan. I was quietly spending my evening, sipping on iced tea and watching stupid videos when someone knocked. I knew who it was. There was only one person to pounce on my door like the maniac he was. I didn't answer. I just froze on my couch. The only thing I was able to think about was that this thin door was the only obstacle between him and me. Then, he started screaming. I didn't get everything he said. The fan was covering most of his screaming, but I can still remember some words. Children of the devil. Trust. Open the effing door. And the worst one. You'll burn. Then there was laughing, straight out of a horror movie. That's when I heard him laughing that it dawned on me how alone I was. How we were the only 2 people in this whole house. How he could just snap the door open, and only God knows what he would do. I found the force to get up. I went to my bathroom and sat behind the door. And then I cried again. Trying to muffle the screaming and laughing, I texted a friend who convinced me to call the cops. This time, they answered. I ended up calling too late. He was already back to his apartment when they came. 3 polite knocks. I ended up letting them in. There was 5 of them, one of them on the step to the other apartment. He ended up finding glasses filled with alcohol, partially drank. I still can hear the poison in his voice when he bitterly said, "This asshole took liquid courage." They believed me. They reassured me, but at the end of the day, there was nothing they could do. I could just sit, wait, and be terrified. After this, I went to the police station and filed a report. I quickly learned that 2 other neighbors did the same as me. A social worker went to the neighbor, talked to him, and apparently he swore to not bother me again. After that, it was just loud music in the middle of the night, and nothing more. Still, I had this lingering feeling. It wasn't over yet. For 2 months, everything went fine until one morning I opened my door and found a beer. I left it there, and it was gone later that night. The next day, same exact thing. He kept putting beers in front of my door for a week. It was 10 a.m. I just got out of the shower, dressed with a black t-shirt but still in my underwear, when my interphone rang. Like I always did because my window reaches my belly, I passed my head through the window. There, I saw a guy who worked in an office just in front of the house. He was manically screaming at me and doing weird gestures. Obviously panicked, but right next to him was the neighbor. They were both grinning. It took me a couple seconds to understand what was going on. I was way too preoccupied by the sinister expression of my neighbor. But when I heard it,
Come out, the house is burning.
so I looked in the direction of my neighbor's apartment. Sure enough, thick black smoke coming out of the open windows. I just put on my jeans and grabbed my keys. No ID, no cell phone, nothing but my clothes and my keys. In the corridor, I smelled smoke. I coughed a couple of times before running out. I was frightened. I was confused. I was supposed to go to an appointment for a job, only 30 minutes from this point. I was watching the house burning. I was fearing for my home being turned into nothing more but a pile of ashes. The neighbor was just standing there, a glass full of amber looking like liquid, and a freaking grin. He was still smoking, while looking at the smoke, as the guy next to him screamed at him. I was still watching it all burn, asking myself how long would it take before the fire reached my apartment. When somebody grabbed my arm, it was a woman. One of my neighbors who also worked next door. She grabbed me and forced me to sit on the bench with her. She took my hand and kept telling the neighbor not to approach me. She gave me water, and she also helped me contact the person I was supposed to see for the job. Most importantly, she didn't let the neighbor get to me and stood in front of me the whole time, doing her best to shield me. The firefighters arrived quickly, along with the cops. They asked him basic questions like whether or not there was gas inside, but he mocked them while laughing at them. He tried smashing his glass on a cop's head. That's when they were arrested. That's when the woman let go of my hand and told me at this time we were free from him. The fire was put down quickly. Only his apartment was burnt thanks to great insulation. However, the level of carbon monoxide was high enough to kill someone if they stayed inside. It smelled like smoke, like burning plastic and wet ashes, but we were all fine. The neighbor was sent to a psychiatric hospital, and the landlord was finally able to break the contract. A neighbor told me when he left in the morning there was a beer in front of my door, but when I exited in a hurry, there was nothing. The fire was ruled as an accident, and we haven't heard anything of him since then. Slowly, I was able to go outside without activating my phone's camera and gripping my keys like knives. I was able to climb down the stairs freely after all this time. I was finally able to rest, but his belongings stayed for a long time after that, and each time I passed to get to the front door, I saw his notebooks laying around. I always told myself I wasn't the kind of person to snoop. Still, curiosity got the best of me. Like I expected, a lot of gibberish was written down, some racist stuff, and a lot of Nazi symbols. Nothing abnormal coming from this guy. Then I found something else, like a log. Still hard to decipher, until it all clicked. Under my eyes were the times when people entered and exited the house. He kept traces of everybody's moves. I found my pages quite easily. Each day for at least 6 months. He knew when I was alone. He knew when I was going grocery shopping, how long I left, and how I looked when I was back. Each time I passed his window, he would write it all down. He would write comments, which sometimes made sense, sometimes not. And most importantly, when the fire started, he knew I was still inside, and he knew I was the only one left. My friend Sally has had a bad run with neighbors, but this one was the worst. Sally lives very close to me, about a 10-minute walk. We were both around 14 when this happened. We live rural, so we both have a lot of land. Me and Sally decided to go camping on her land one night. We bought cheap hammocks and went through the bushland. The days prior, we spent cleaning up some razor glass with a cane knife to make a path. We probably should have worn long pants because we ended up with little cuts all over our legs and some on our arms. We set up our hammocks and brought quite a few blankets because it does get pretty cold at night, even though you're sweating throughout the day. We were still on her property and hadn't gone to her neighbor's boundary. Her neighbor had just leased the land to new tenants. Me and Sally were sitting on our hammocks talking and laughing. This was around 9 p.m. We heard something in the bush. We just thought it was a wallaby. There's plenty of wallabies around here. Then we could see the figure of a man. We were whispering to each other, trying to see who it was. At first, we thought it was her brother. He's come and scared us when we were previously camping. Then, as he got closer, we were thinking that it could have been her dad. It was dark, and all the bush looks the same from every angle. We realized the man was coming from a different direction, other than our house. We didn't dare move, and covered our torches under our blankets. The man came up and said hi, and introduced himself as Ben. Now, Ben was extremely drunk. He staggered around, and he reeked of alcohol. He started saying how we had a nice little camp here, and said something pretty unsettling.
I'll have to come out and sunbake naked here on one of those hammocks.
Me and Sally gave each other worried looks, but didn't say anything. It only got worse from there. I can't remember everything he said, because it was a while ago, and he was mumbling on for what felt like forever. But some of the things that stuck out were,
I'll have to kill you, Wolf Creek style.
and also said,
You're nearly legal then.
when he asked us our age, Ben was probably in his 40s. Me and Sally were texting each other while he was talking and coming up with an escape plan. He also offered us to puff the magic dragon and pulled out a glass pipe. We declined. Sally said that we were going back to the house to make food, and he told us to come back. We left our blankets and most of our stuff there and legged it. We told our dad what happened and we slept inside. The next morning, we went back to the campsite to find everything burnt. A circle with a probably 20-meter radius was all burnt. Coming from the circle was a line of burnt grass. Going towards the neighbor's house, I'm not a firefighter or do forensics, but it seemed obvious that some kind of fuel was used. Me and Sally were talking, and it dawned on us the possibility that Ben might have thought that we were still in the hammocks due to the pile of blankets. Ben was definitely drunk enough not to be able to tell the difference. We went and told Sally's dad, who then checked it out and then went next door. Ben's roommate answered the door and said that Ben wasn't home and apologized, and even gave Sally's dad $50 for the blankets and hammocks. Nothing more happened for a few months. Sally told me at school about how Ben had been caught on camera sneaking around her yard. I went to her house after school because she was going to be home alone until her dad finished work. I ended up sleeping over there that night. That's when he came over. Ben was drunk and came out the front of Sally's house and started yelling and accusing Sally of stealing his dog. Sally's dad called the police. They arrested him. The next day, we found a knife in the yard. It wasn't from Sally's house. The police came again, and we told them about the knife, and they got the footage from the cameras as well. I don't know what happened to Ben, but he no longer lives next to Sally. One night, my boyfriend and I were watching a movie in the living room, and there was a knock on the door. I am 8 months pregnant, and we were about 27. My kids, 5 and 7, are sleeping down the hall. My boyfriend peeked out the window, and we see it's Roger. We met Roger a few months before. We helped him with some flooring in his kitchen, and chatted outside a few times. He's in his 50s or 60s, very nice, and lives alone. Zero bad vibes. He mentioned that he was a dealer, and has pounds of weed in his car or whatever. Okay, Roger, you do you. Back to the story. We open the door. It's late and dark, and at this point, I'm looking at Roger like he's a nice little old man. As soon as the door opened, he's inside. I can tell right away something isn't right with him. The house layout is living room, front door leading into the kitchen, with a hallway next to the kitchen table. It's very small. Before he sits down in the chair right beside the hallway entrance, I see a effing huge-ass hunting knife with a baseball bat tucked in his pants under his sweatshirt. So now, him and my boyfriend are sitting at the table, and my boyfriend has no idea. I didn't know what to do. My boyfriend sits across from him and asks him if he needs something, or if he's okay. He starts getting very agitated, yelling that the people in my house are not happy with you, and yelling about the flooring we had helped him with in the summer. I still didn't know what was going on, but he seemed to think that the flooring wasn't done, and if my boyfriend didn't go right now with them to fix it, that the people in his house would be very angry. He brought my kids up, and then we got into an argument. I told him that they were sleeping, and he needed to leave right now, and that my boyfriend wasn't going anywhere. My boyfriend sees things getting intense, and still doesn't know about the weapons. He jumps up immediately, tries to defuse the situation by saying he will go with him. The plan is to get Roger out of the door and lock it behind him. They get to the door and open it. My boyfriend turns to me, and when he does, Roger pushes him surprisingly hard, and he stumbles into the doorway. where Roger immediately slams it, and I'm just there, alone. I hear yelling as I'm calling 911, and the dude tells me to go outside. I just remember at the time, I was shocked that he wanted me to wander around outside, but I can see why now. So I go out to my deck, and they are gone, like it's dead quiet, and it's only been a minute, so I just stand inside, totally horrified and useless. Time goes by, and suddenly, there's a crazy pounding on the door. Thankfully, it's my boyfriend. I open it, and he comes flying in with his eyes bugged out, and he has a mystery axe. Apparently, as soon as they got to the road, Roger pulled a knife out and started yelling at him, threatening to cut his throat for the people inside his house. My boyfriend instantly booked it out of there and ran through yards to get back home, grabbing someone's axe on the way. We had a court case, but we just sat outside the courtroom until they told us it was over. Roger was there in an oversized suit. He lived in the same cul-de-sac as us, and my kids wait for the bus where he walks by. No one ever told us if he was arrested or when he was let out. The next day, we moved. I think it's about time to look for a property with about 100 acres. Thank you for watching, and if you have any stories that you would like me to read, information is down below. Please feel free to contact me. Make sure to close your blinds tonight. Stay safe out there.